Hello, and welcome to the Teams and Office 365 External Sharing Talk at GalacticSummit. My name is Peter Carson. I'm the President of Extranet User Manager, also an Office Apps and Services MVP with Microsoft. We're going to be publishing up the deck and the recording. You'll be able to grab all my contact information from there. We have a fairly packed agenda we're going to be covering in the next 30 minutes. We're going to start with some background, talk about the out-of-the-box external sharing in SharePoint OneDrive, get into the team side of things, both from a provisioning and a sharing perspective, and then get under the hood a little bit into Azure Active Directory, business to business, talk about portals for external users and publishing to Azure, and then wrap up and summarize from there. So just starting out from a background point of view, there's kind of two styles of external sharing that I'd like to talk about in these talks. The first is more collaborative, and the second is more about publishing. So in the collaborative style, this can fall into what we call unstructured or structured, depending on the number of users that you've got. And really, it's about working with people external to your organization. It's more than just publishing information out to them. You want to get into the full authoring experience, bring them right into the Office 365, collaborate on things like projects and such through there. In the publishing model, this is more of a one-to-many where you've got sort of a smaller set of content authors and you want to push content out securely, either to a secure website, maybe even to a public anonymous section on a site. There's often self-registration. There may be some limited feedback, liking and commenting, some file uploading happening, or profile management as part of that. So as we're talking with clients about external sharing, we're going to go through these 5 questions that kind of guide the process of what we're looking to put together. And the first is just, who is it that you're going to be sharing with? Is it a board of directors portal maybe that you're putting up, a member or a customer portal, or is there multiple different scenarios you want to consider from an external sharing perspective? From there, how are those people going to come in? Do you know who all those users are? Is it going to be invitation only, where you can send out email registrations, or maybe you need something like private registration that you can share with those potential users? If there's a self-registration model, often you've got hundreds or maybe thousands of external users coming in. They need to be able to self-discover, self-register. May still need to go through some sort of approval workflow. There might be some auto approvals or delegation happening as part of that. Third up is how your external users are going to authenticate. Typically you'd think of maybe an email and password, and maybe you're maintaining those credentials for them. We're kind of moving away from that with federation models, allowing people to use, say, their Office 365 credentials, a one-time passcode through email, maybe a Microsoft or Google account from a social identity point of view. From an interactions point of view, what sort of interactions are your external users going to have? They're just going to access the published content? Are they going to collaborate? Are they going to become full members of team or project sites? Or maybe they even need to become full-fledged members of an Office 365 group or a Microsoft team. And then fifth up, what sort of applications they're going to be using. Is it strictly, say, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business type of file sharing? They need to get into Teams, Planner, Yammer. There's some other apps that you need to be aware of. Power BI has its own unique licensing requirements where the external users need to be licensed in their own tenant. Stream doesn't actually support external users just yet. We've been yelling loud about that. It's pretty high on the user voice votes for Stream. So be aware of what your different options are from that point of view. Or maybe you've still got a SharePoint on-premises you want to share, a third-party SaaS application, some custom applications either on-premise or in the cloud that you want to share with those external users. And all those are reasonable options depending on the style of external sharing that we're talking about doing. So the first style we're going to talk about is just the out-of-the-box external sharing, also known as unstructured extranets. So many of you have probably seen these dialogues here in the SharePoint interface, maybe now that it's rolled into Teams as well, where you can send links out. Those may be are getting shared with anybody that gets the link from an anonymous point of view. That sounds a little scary, but it's actually not a bad idea. It actually makes a lot of sense in a lot of scenarios where you don't know specifically who you're going to share it with. You want it to be reshared with other people from there. Those anonymous style links actually work quite well from that. And they're actually quite preferable to doing something like an email attachment where you lose control over that document as soon as you've sent it out from an email point of view. Or perhaps you just want to share with people in your organization or people with existing access, or you want to name out specific people from there. So you can set different rules as to how that sharing link is going to be used. So if we're thinking about those 5 considerations that we just went through a minute ago, there's certain restrictions in terms of what of those you're able to achieve from a out-of-the-box external sharing perspective. Obviously any type of external user can be shared with, but it is invitation only. There is no self-registration process as part of the out-of-the-box experience. And you are limited in terms of the types of authentication that happens. It's either got to be an Office 365 or Microsoft account, a one-time passcode, or a Google Gmail federation. They can have any sort of interactions. Bit of a misnomer here. It doesn't necessarily have to be Office 365 only from a sharing point of view, but in terms of what you can actually share out through the out-of-the-box features, that is restricted to Office 365 only. Now, as you're setting this up, of course, you're probably thinking, well, how do I manage that? How do I limit what people are able to do and only share as appropriate based on the rules we have at our organization? Well, there's a number of ways that you can control that. You can control, first off, who can share to external users. You can say, you know what, it's all right. Everybody in the organization is free to share, or maybe there's only specific people. You can actually restrict it down to a particular Active Directory group, or maybe you want to turn it off completely. I don't actually encourage that. If you were to shut sharing down completely, it doesn't mean that people won't share. They just won't share through Office 365. They'll find other means. They'll do email attachments. They'll get a personal Dropbox going. They'll do different things like that. And then as well as who can share, you can determine which users they can share with. Can they share with anybody? Does it have to be authenticated only? Is there particular domains? Do you have a whitelist or a blacklist from that point of view? Or again, do you want to turn it off entirely? And then in terms of what can be shared externally, could it be anything in there? Is there only specific sites that should be shared out? Or is there some information qualification? Do you use something like Azure Information Protection to label sensitive content, and maybe only files without that sensitive label on it can be shared out? And then what sort of links can be shared? Are they just there by default? Is there things like mandatory expirations? Is there certain types of shareable links like edit links that you want to disable? Again, you've got a fair bit of control over what that looks like. And when you're setting up that control, there's actually 3 different places you need to go to do that. You have to start in the Office 365 admin, and there's a single button just to turn on sharing as a whole. So if you've got that turned off, you know that sharing is completely locked down in your tenant. So you do want to turn that on if you want to do any sort of external sharing. And then you've actually got a lot of choice when you get to the SharePoint admin console. You can define, how permissive the sharing should be, who's allowed to share, who you think share with. Is there blocked domains or only allowed domains from a whitelist or blacklist point of view? That's all done at the SharePoint admin level. And then what you need to do is you need to open up the sharing as wide open as you need it to be for any particular site. And then you can go into the site collection admin and you can lock that down and tighten it down and say, you know what, for these sites, we don't want sharing externally at all. We want to turn it off completely and only have it available on these other sites. Now you can do it all through the admin consoles, or you can use PowerShell to set that up from that point of view. Now, I showed you this dialog previously. The thing I want to point out here is that Microsoft's actually done a really nice job of providing this sharing experience consistently across a number of different products. So it first appeared in SharePoint and OneDrive for Business. They've now extended into Teams and into the Windows Explorer when you're using the OneDrive for Business Sync client as well. So regardless of which of those tools you're choosing to share from, you see a consistent experience, and the rules that you apply consistently across all of those. Now, in addition to sending documents out, you can actually request files in as well. This is a feature on OneDrive for Business that they announced last year. I quite like it. I use it a fair bit myself. So basically, you create a folder in your OneDrive for Business, and you can create a file request for that. It basically creates a link that you can share out with people, and anybody can use that link to submit files in there. And a single link can be used from many uploaders. What it'll do is it'll put the name of the person that uploaded, at the front of the file names that they upload, so you can identify whose files are whose, and they can't see each other's files. In fact, they can't even see what they've uploaded themselves. It basically goes into this black box that only you as the person that requesting files can see that. And you can set up alerts so it'll email you to let you know that, hey, there's new files there, so you know when people are submitting through there. So that's mainly focused on the SharePoint and OneDrive side of things. Let's switch gears for a minute here and talk more about the team side. And before we get into the team sharing, I actually want to talk about Teams provisioning. What many people don't realize is if you were to leave Teams wide open and allow anybody to create teams, it's not just that they're creating teams. So I love this infographic from Matt Wade, fellow MVP, and it kind of explains on the top here when I create one of these things. So for example, here I'm creating a Microsoft team. I don't just get a team. I actually get a SharePoint team site as part of that. I'm on our team site. That team site has a OneNote in it. I may get a planner as part of that. A stream video portal gets created, all within this concept of an Office 365 group. And yes, I do get my Teams chat and Teams wiki. I even get a shared email box and a shared calendar as part of that in Exchange as well. So there's a lot of elements that are getting created, and you want to be aware of who should be able to set that up. And in fact, if we think back to the SharePoint Admin Center here, remember I said you needed to open this up as permissive as possible for sort of the least permissive site that you're going to have in your tenant. That means when somebody creates a Microsoft team, by default, this SharePoint team site here is going to be set to that least permissive state. And maybe that's not what you intended. Maybe that was a private team that should only be used internally, and you don't want external sharing happening as part of that. What you need to do then is lock that down at the site collection level and say, well, let's turn off the sharing for this particular team that we just created. Well, the best way to do that is actually to put some sort of Teams provisioning process in place in your organization. We've actually spent a lot of time on this over the last couple of years. We've got a number of white papers published up, an open source project up in GitHub, webinars and such. You can grab the link here and see all that content. And basically, the idea is that people are able to come to a provisioning site, so a place to request a site. And basically what we want to do is still make it self-service, but put some structure and some governance in front of that. So if I come over here to a browser, this is actually our demo tenant here. We've got the ability to say, hey, I want to request a team. Rather than going through the regular Teams process, what it takes you to is a page with a couple of web parts here. So these A to Z and sites web parts are actually part of the open source solution as well. They're a great way to discover teams that already exist, because what you don't want to have happen is somebody request a team for a project, for example, where that already exists. Somebody else already requested it, and you end up with 2 or 3 teams for the same project. That's not an ideal situation. But once they've determined that, they can come in here, they can set up their divisions, and it's all driven by SharePoint lists, so you can extend and customize the solution. Let's say I go into my temporary demos here, I can choose a different template. And what happens is, in addition to picking, hey, this is a modern team site, I can decide, hey, do I want to create a team and a OneNote and a planner as part of that? And you can actually bake these choices right into the template itself, that people don't need to decide that. They just pick the template and everything gets set up appropriately. That can be extended also to include the sharing features, to say, hey, this template is for external sharing, and we can actually set a prefix that gets put into the title and the alias, so when people go to that team, they know right away, just by the title of the team and by the alias of the team, hey, this is set up for external sharing, and the features get turned on in the SharePoint administration. Whereas if they picked a different template that said, hey, this is internal only, different prefix can go on that, and they know, hey, this is only for staff. I'm not even able to share externally as part of that. So just having some structure around that really helps from that point of view. Now, there is another feature that you need to turn on the Teams admin console. So we talked about the SharePoint administration. So if you come into the Teams admin, there is this allow guest access in Teams that need to be turned on as well. And this isn't when you just want to share a document or a folder with people, but rather you want to make somebody a full-fledged member of the Microsoft team. So let's say you have an outside contractor that's working on a big project with you. You don't want to just share documents with them. You actually want to do the chat, involve them in conversations, give them the full Teams experience, all the tabs and everything else. So I can just simply enter their email address in. Teams will tell me, hey, that person you're about to add is a guest. It's not part of your organization. But because I've turned that radio button on in the Teams admin, it lets me do that. It sends out an invitation, and then that person becomes a full-fledged member of my Microsoft team. So you have to decide, what style of sharing you want to do. Do I just want to share a few documents out? Do I want to share an entire SharePoint site out? Or do I actually want to make that person a full-fledged member of my Microsoft team? Okay. So let's switch gears now and let's talk more about what we call structured extranets. So the ones we were talking about earlier are more ad hoc. I've got a couple people I want to invite in, and I'm just going to go through the standard invitation process to do that. But let's say I've got thousands of people or tens of thousands of people that I want to bring into my portal. That scale doesn't really work in that self-service model. So you need something more from that perspective. And really what you need is actually what's under the hood from the out-of-the-box experience, which is Azure Active Directory Business to Business. So the B2B service from Microsoft, it's a free service, allows you to invite in as many external users as you want into your Azure AD, and then they can access Office 365 as part of that as well. It's completely free for those external users to use certain features in Office 365, like the SharePoint file sharing that we were showing there, or even making them full members of a SharePoint site or a Microsoft team. You don't need to buy a license for that user as long as they truly are an external user to your organization. Now, you may hear about this 1-to-5 licensing ratio that hey, I need to buy one Azure AD license for every 5 external users that I bring in. That's only if you want to use the premium features. So if you've got, say, a high security external sharing portal that you want to bring people into and you want to apply conditional access policies and multi-factor authentication to ensure that they are who they say they are, you can do that. Those are premium features. So as long as you've got one internal license for every 5 external users that you're using those particular features on, you're covered from a licensing point of view. Otherwise, go ahead and invite as many external users as you'd like. We have a good link here in the deck. Goes back to our website. We've basically got a catalog of dozens of different B2B articles that Microsoft put out on the topic, so lots of different topics in there. Now, when you invite external users in through B2B, they're going to have slightly different onboarding experiences depending on what their account is. Who have you invited in? If you've invited somebody who uses Office 365 today, they have a very seamless experience. They're going to use their same login that they log into their own Office 365 with, and it's going to be very seamless. In fact, if they're already logged into their own Office 365 and they click your link to go into your portal, they're not even going to see a sign-on. It's just going to do a single sign-on right into your portal from there, and it's very seamless. Works the same also from a Microsoft account point of view. Now, if I invite somebody with an organizational email address, say acme.com, and that user doesn't have Office 365, they don't have an Azure AD account, we've set our tenants up to use what's called one-time passcode. This is still a preview feature, but March 2021, they're going to be forcing all tenants to use this approach, and it makes a lot of sense. It's a very low friction, easy way for people to set up. They don't have to create passwords. They don't have to remember anything from that point of view. Basically, each time they go to sign in, it sends them an email. They've got 30 minutes to use the token that comes through, and that's their password to go in. If they say, keep me signed in, they can keep that browser window open maybe for 30 days before they have to go through that process again. It becomes a very easy way to interact with your portal. Now, another preview feature that I'm quite keen on is actually federation from a Google account point of view. So if you invite somebody with a @gmail.com email address, they get that same seamless login experience. If they're already logged into Google, they don't have to log into your portal, and away they go from there. The only caveat to remember there is it does actually need to be a gmail.com email address. If they've federated their organizational email domain with Google, and that's how they're logging in is with their acme.com email domain, for example, Microsoft doesn't know that that's a Google user. They're going to take them through the one-time passcode path. So it does have to be a gmail.com if you want to get that Google federation to work. So where do you set this all up? Well, you actually go into the Azure portal, into Azure Active Directory, and you'll see here in the All Users section, I've actually got a new guest user, and under the bulk activities, I've got a bulk invitation to bulk import guest users. So I can actually create a CSV with 1,000 external users that I want to invite in, upload that CSV into the Azure portal. It'll send out email invitations for all of them, and away you go from there. And there is some customization you can do that. You can customize the email templates, change the look and feel of the login experience and such, put your branding on as part of that. But it's all a very techie experience. I mean, you are working in the Azure portal. It's probably something that IT would be comfortable doing, but a general business user, they'd be a little overwhelmed if they wanted to actually come right into this portal in order to do this. So this is where you typically get into more full-featured portals for external users. And there's a number of options you can do for that. Now you can roll your own. Everything I'm showing and talking about here is actually exposed out through the Graph API. So you could actually build your own external user manager or customer portal, for example, and actually integrate it in through Graph API and run that whole process. It's a fair bit of work. I mean, that's basically what we've done with Extranet User Manager, but it is doable. Microsoft actually just brought out a feature, I think it's still in preview actually right now as well, which is Azure Active Directory Entitlement Management. This is basically a way to define what are called access packages, and they give you access to particular groups or applications or even SharePoint Online sites when you become a member of that package. And you can define workflow processes that onboard those people. You can do some branding and customization around that. Now, it is part of Azure Active Directory P2, so you have to have that Premium 2 license in that 1:5 ratio that we were talking about before. So if you had 500 external people you wanted to bring in through this process, you'd need to make sure that you had at least 100 for that 1:5 ratio Azure Active Directory P2 licenses to cover that. Now, shameless plug here, our Extranet User Manager covers that scenario as well. It goes a little further from a customization point of view. Basically, we ship it with a pre-built .NET Core 3 sample portal, but you get the full source code to that. You can brand it, you can customize it up the wazoo, do what you want with it from that point of view. We also provide an admin portal for creating and managing those users and groups. And our focus is really around how do we make it easier for not just the external users, but the business owners that you want to delegate that management to make it simple for them to own and manage those external user groups. But let's come back to the entitlement management side of it for a second here. I've gone into the Azure portal. This is where you go in order to set up those access packages that I was talking about. So if you come into Azure Active Directory and then into Identity Governance, if you have Azure AD P2 licenses, you'll see this entitlement management feature here, and that will allow you to set up the access packages, define what rights that grants to people, and what the workflows are around onboarding people through that process. A couple of client scenarios here. These are all live. You can actually go have a look at them. Ontario MD being the biggest one that we've done from a public website point of view and a sign-in registration process. There's tens of thousands of external users in the healthcare profession throughout the province of Ontario that come into this site. And under the hood, they're all coming into to Azure AD B2B through that access and content that's being published up from Office 365. Similar situation for Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies. And then the third one here is actually not live yet, but it is available. We haven't launched it officially out. It's actually a portal that we're doing around using VR as a form of medical therapy for people with neuropathic pain, particularly from spinal cord injuries. So we're actually playing around with SharePoint spaces and creating virtual 3D VR spaces that can be useful from a therapeutic point of view. So interesting project there. I'm actually going to use our website though and actually take you through this scenario of onboarding somebody through. So let's flip over to another browser window here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to launch out to an incognito window and launch up our website. So if we come in here, I'm going to use this option here right on our home page to say, hey, I want to do a test drive. This is really to experience an onboarding process. So basically, I'm going to choose the Office 365 scenario and begin a test drive here. It's going to take me through a process of entering my email, going through a registration, and then signing in. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to start by using a dummy email address here. I'm just going to use the next made up one. I've got a couple of dry runs that I've done already. So let's go ahead and use that. Now it hasn't seen this email address before. So it's going to take me through the registration process. So this is a key thing, not making people figure out or remember whether they need to sign in or register. So just enter your email address, we'll figure it out for you and go from there. So right now this is calling out to the Graph API. It's actually creating that B2B user in Azure Active Directory and getting the invitation together and set up from that point of view. Once that's ready, it'll then continue right into the login process for me. So there we go. We've now started the login process. And this particular account that I've chosen doesn't have Office 365 behind it. So this is that second scenario of using the one-time passcode. So if I go ahead and click the send code here, what it's doing is it's sending an email with a one-time passcode to that email address that I just registered, and then I can enter that in here in order to continue with the login. So here's the email that came through from Microsoft. I can just copy that verification code, paste it back into the login window here, and I'm going to continue along. Now remember, this is the first time I've ever registered through this email address, so I have to go through a consent process to say, yes, I'm agreeing to allow this application to sign me in and read my profile information, so I have to accept that. And then as part of our Extranet User Manager product, we actually put a second disclaimer or terms of use process in there as well. You don't have to have it lit up, but if you want to have, say, terms of use of your site that you want people to accept before they come in, I can say, yes, I agree to those terms and conditions. Well, obviously this can be completely customized, as can the whole branding of the experience, the URLs that it's on, everything is under your control from that point of view. I say, yep, let's go ahead, enter the site. And what it's done, it's actually taken me through to a SharePoint.com site. So it actually onboarded me into Office 365 as a guest user. I can now see the site with whatever permissions was granted to me. And the way those permissions are granted is I'm actually made a member of a group here, and I can actually see with the SharePoint Framework web part that we've added into this site who the users are. Now this particular one we've locked down from a security point of view so that demo users can't see other demo users, but normally I would see all the members of the site through this. And actually, if I come back to my other browser tab here, I actually see the Extranet User Manager admin console here. I can actually go in and say, let's search up the groups in this particular site. And I can see here's that public group no approval that we were just looking at in SharePoint. So this is actually under the hood an Azure Active Directory group. And we can see the members that have gone into that. So there's my GalacticSummit 5 user that's been added into that. And I can see the details around the group that, hey, it doesn't require any approval. From a registration point of view, it's associated with this particular SharePoint.com site. This is the underlying group that's with that. I can even put in some summary and description information. So as people are joining this site, there's some background given to them before they go through that process. And when I go back over to the membership here, if I go into that GalacticSummit 5 user that I just registered with, I can see all of their profile information that they entered. You know, what was their company, what was their country. I may have lit up other of these fields. That registration process is completely customizable. So you get a very nice way to onboard people through there. So the last topic I want to talk about is going beyond just bringing people into Office 365, but actually pushing your content out somewhere else. So in this scenario here, we're going to talk about publishing to Azure. You know, so in a simple scenario, let's say we've got some content in SharePoint Online that we're authoring. We can actually use workflows like Azure Logic App to look for changes in SharePoint and push that out, say, into an Azure blob storage, for example, here. And this is a quick sample Logic App that I've created. Let me just flip over to the live app from here. So if you're familiar with Microsoft Flow or Power Automate, you'll actually be familiar with this. It's the same, it's actually the underlying technology underneath that. And what we have is a very simple three-step workflow. So when content is created in SharePoint Online, this is looking at that particular site and document library. What it's doing is just grabbing that content, creating a corresponding entry in a blob storage that you can then publish out either securely or anonymously from there. So here you can see I've dropped a Word document into this document library in SharePoint Online. The Logic app is run, and it's pushed that document out into a blob storage. I can then provide secure access into that without having to bring people right into the whole Office 365 environment. So let's take that one step further. You can actually go to this site, www.ontariomd.ca, and you'll see an anonymous site here. It has a whole sign-in and registration for external users to come in. And what we're doing is we're actually publishing content up from SharePoint Online. So content authors come in, they author not just documents and images, but even the full web content itself. And it goes through what we call our Extranet publisher, publishes that content up into an Azure website. So as a content author, I can actually come into a SharePoint Online site like this that we use to manage our Extranet User Manager website itself and say, hey, I want to come into the events section, you know, see all the pages that we have published up. We can see that we've tagged them for different purposes in there. I can flip this into a quick edit mode if I want to do quick editing in those tags, or I can actually go into a full-on authoring experience of the page content itself right in SharePoint Online. And what we're doing now is actually taking that one step further and creating a custom page so you can author the metadata as well as have a very specific full-featured HTML editor right in line here. So not embedded into SharePoint, but actually customized specific to this purpose of creating the content. Now we still expose all the same SharePoint features, so I can save or check this document in. We still get the major and minor versions, publishing concepts, approval workflows. I can preview this, I can publish this out, go through all those steps. But at the end of that, ultimately what we're doing is pushing that content out into this Azure website from there. So a lot of content there. Just to wrap up quickly here, we started with the out-of-the-box unstructured, just SharePoint OneDrive style link sharing and how you administer that. Moving into the Teams provisioning side to say, hey, it's not just about allowing guest users in Teams, it's about how those teams get set up. And then moving into full-on structured extranets, where we're bringing in larger numbers of users through the Azure AD B2B side of things, and ultimately publishing content out into Azure websites from there. Just quickly, a couple of wrap-up points. Actually going to be doing a part 2 to this talk as a webinar with Ben Nyland from ShareGate on June 17th. Come to our site to sign up for that. And then Commsverse online event on July 6th. And then hopefully in person with this group as part of the European Collaboration Summit in October 2020 in Germany. From there, I'm going to sign off. Have a great rest of your day, and I hope you enjoyed the conference.
Thank you for being a part of the Galactic Collaboration Summit. Join the community and meet in-person world-class Microsoft and MVP speakers this autumn in Wiesbaden, Frankfurt, Germany, with 15 full-day tutorials and over 150 Microsoft 365 and Azure sessions at the combined European Collaboration Summit and European Cloud Summit from 26 to 28 October 2020. Community rocks.